All right. Good afternoon, and thanks everyone for joining us. I've got a little housekeeping to do and introductions, and then we'll get started. My name's Mark Hefner. I'm the landowner advisor for Braun and Gresham and Plateau Land and Wildlife Management, and I'll be your moderator today. Owning rural land in Texas can be complex. It can come with a wide range of issues. My role as the landowner advisor is to understand your issues and goals and advise you on the best route, perhaps even introduce you to somebody that can help, an expert. Braun and Gresham is a law firm that represents rural landowners and the unique issues they face. Very unique situations in Texas that require expertise, and Braun and Gresham specializes in that. Some of those are rural real estate transactions, eminent domain cases, and even conservation strategies, which is some of the stuff we'll discuss today. Our sister company, Plateau Land and Wildlife Management, assists landowners with wildlife management and ag filings, and also has a team of expert biologists that can advise landowners how to better manage your property, just give you some solid advice. Today, I'd like to introduce David Braun. He's an attorney and counselor and will be giving the presentation. David and I have been working together for years, helping landowners. And today we're going to actually use an interactive approach, which is a little different for Zoom calls. We're going to use an interactive approach where you can actually ask questions real time. If you wish to participate, you're going to have to unmute yourself. So we're going to open it up for you. But then if you want to ask a question, just jump in there. Hover around your screen a bit and you'll see the red line going through the speaker, and just unmute that. If you're not comfortable with asking questions in front of an audience, you're going to have all of our contact information. If you want to discuss something confidential, you can come to us later. You're going to receive our contact information so you can get a hold of us. You can also choose to type in. So you can see, if you, again, hover around your screen, you'll see a Q&A. And you can type in your questions. I'll be monitoring those as well and can present them to David. Lastly, the one thing I want to cover is we're going to be recording the webinar. That's important. Again, if you have something confidential that you wish to discuss or don't want to be recorded, please don't concern yourself with that. Just let us know outside of the actual recording, and we're happy to jump in and help. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to David Braun.
Thanks, Mark, and welcome, everyone. Appreciate you taking your lunchtime with us. There's my trusty PowerPoint. So today we're going to talk about a relatively new tool that some families are using to conserve their land, and particularly if they have the feeling that their land is a legacy for their family. This is a great tool. We're going to be talking about conservation easements, and really just an overview. It's a very fast emerging topic. There's lots of ways to use conservation easements, lots of variations. But I'm going to give you an overview today, hopefully answer some of your questions. But the reason we call it legacy for my family is what we've found is that the best candidates for using the conservation easements are people who are really devoted to the notion that their land stays natural, undeveloped, for recreation, agriculture, history, as a kind of a benchmark for their family. So let me see. I think I need to. Oh, I've got control. Thought I had control. Avalon, I may need to get you to advance the screen because I'm not successful. Maybe, there you go, thanks. Whoops, neither are you. Okay, this is just kind of a little agenda. The topics we're going to touch on today. Going to look at the perspective of conservation easements, conserved land as as it's emerged. It's like I said, a pretty new strategy. Give you the basics of how it works, who should consider easements. We'll talk some about the financial benefits, and then look a little deeper at the kinds of restrictions that are embodied in a conservation easement, and what the result is for all the players. So I'm gonna try. No. Okay. Oh, is it down there at the bottom? I'm supposed to be pressing. Maybe I've got control now. Okay. So conservation easements have been around since the 1950s, but as they were really a tool that was mainly used on the East Coast and the West Coast in estate planning. The first conservation easement in Texas was in the late 1980s. I worked on that, and then we had a very slow introduction of conservation easements to Texas landowners through the 90s. Very few people were willing to try it, consider it. But since 2000, things have really begun to ramp up quite a bit. Now, here's what we can say about Texas. There have been more than 2 million acres of Texas land conserved since 1990. Most of that has been in the last decade, but and these numbers are old. The last census we have is 2015. The landowners are joined in these conservation efforts by a kind of nonprofit called land trusts. And when we started back in the 80s, there were only 2. Now there are 35 in Texas. And I'd say the interest is accelerating. So hopefully today we can answer the question if this is something your family should be considering.
Hey, David.
Yes.
We did get one question pop up, kind of around acreage. The question's pretty straightforward. Is there a minimum acreage necessary to be considered for a conservation easement?
No, there's not. And I've actually worked on easements and measured in square feet. But there are two questions that will really answer that. How important is your land for conservation? Do you have something that's really special, or is it a little more typical land, in which case, you know, it may be harder to make the case for 5 acres in your backyard than 5 acres with an endangered species. So that's what I'd call conservation value. There's also a question of land trust interest. These 35 land trusts, they have their own mission, their own goals, and they have limited resources. And so finding a land trust that will work on a small property is sometimes a challenge too. So the answer is there's no absolute limit, but it is sometimes harder to find traction with a small property. And that's something we just have to work through individually.
Great. So if I'm a landowner, and so that would just take some additional steps, possibly talking with you, getting your input, that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. And
Okay.
and you can also talk directly to land trusts, but
Okay.
but you get with you know, with Braun and Gresham, you get perspective of what all the land trusts are likely to respond. In fact, I'm working on a 5-acre property right now, and it's very much at the core. Both of these discussions, value and capacity, very much at our in the midst of our discussion.
Okay.
So let's go on to the next one.
Great.
I'm still not finding the controls. Yeah, this is just to give you the rest of the story. There are 2.5 billion acres in the United States, and as of 2015, about 2% of the US was put into conservation. by decision of individual landowners. There around the country, there's 1,362 active land trusts. So again, a growing movement, supported very strongly by some states, like Colorado and Alabama, for example, which will put state funding behind conservation easements. Next slide. Okay, I'm gonna just run through just a very basic 6 or 7 slides to introduce the idea, and then I'm gonna pause and take questions, because I hope that I've at least given you the broad outlines of what a conservation easement is and what the process might be like. So next slide. So a conservation easement is a voluntary, I really want to stress that, legal agreement by which a landowner spells out restrictions on the future uses of their land. That usually means the land is kept relatively natural, but there's lots of flexibility and nobody is forced into any decision. This is like planning your will. You give what you want to who you want to give it to. It's a legal document. It's signed by both the landowner and the land trust, so it's an agreement between them. And it's a property right. It's not a contract. It is notarized and filed in the deed records of the county to put everyone in the public on notice that this property is conserved. Next. Now, I refer to the goal here of the relationship between landowner and land trust as a partnership, because really, when a landowner enters into an agreement with a land trust, there has to be a lot of trust. You are conveying rights over your land to someone that you just met. And we spend a lot of time helping people choose partners and form this partnership, because the land trust's duty in the agreement is to permanently protect the landowner's property and vision of the property. In exchange, the landowner can get paid cash, or more often get tax savings. Next.
David, before you go too far, you mentioned picking the land trust. Can you give maybe just a brief example on how a landowner with a vision would pick a specific trust? Do they meet together? Do they talk? Do they have similar maybe visions? Is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot like dating. You're about to form a permanent relationship with these nonprofit organizations. You need to get to know them.
Sure.
I usually recommend 2 or 3 appropriate land trusts. Encourage our clients to meet them, talk about the process, talk about the vision and goals. And I provide a list of questions that really get into the meat of the future relationship, so that that our clients really hear from the land trust the things that make a difference. But here's some obvious things. Some land trusts are trying to preserve hunting, like Ducks Unlimited and Quail Unlimited. Mm-hmm. These groups are devoted to the idea of always having land that's huntable. Well, obviously that wouldn't be a very good choice to someone who doesn't want their land hunted. Some people are trying to conserve agriculture, and so there are land trusts whose job is the preservation of agricultural land. So those, obviously, you've got to choose a similar mission, and then you also have to choose trust and compatibility in the partnership.
That's perfect. Thank you, David.
Next. Oh, here we're here next. So what are these rights that you're giving up? What is this agreement about? Well, to understand that, you need to understand the way the legal system views your property. Property ownership is many, many rights all bundled together into what we call owning land. And I mean, I've mentioned a few: your right to hunt, your right to build a house, your right to subdivide, your right to sell. All those are property rights. They're actually, we rarely think about all of them, but there are actually hundreds of these rights. And you as a landowner, if you own them all, you can choose to sever some of your rights and sell them to someone else. We almost every Texan knows this concept because we sever mineral rights. A family may sell their land but keep the mineral rights. That's a great example of breaking the bundle of rights, what we learn in law school is a bundle of sticks, and separating them. So you have two ownerships of the same land, different rights. You can do that with water rights. You can do that with hunting rights. You can do that with access easements or pipeline easements. But what a conservation easement usually deals with is development rights. How much you can build on the property, how much you can change the natural habitats. So that's where conservation easements open up a whole new line of thinking about what it means and who owns which rights. Next. So here's what they usually do. An easement permanently restricts how land is going to be used in the future. So if your family has fallen in love with this view and you want this view not to have a gas station in the middle of it, you can through a conservation easement preserve this scenic view. But how do you do that for permanently? Most of us don't live permanently. Most of us are passing on our land at the end of our life or before. So how do you permanently restrict? Well, the theory of a conservation easement is you give your partner organization, which theoretically could live forever, you give them the right to enforce the restrictions you choose. So essentially the land trust becomes your agent. Their job is to monitor, and if you or your heirs or somebody you sell the property to tries to break the restriction, tries to build the gas station, their job is to step in and enforce your desires. And they're your agent in that. And one of the questions you would always want to ask is, how stable are you? Are you going to be here in 100 years? How well funded are you? And that's a big part of choosing a land trust. Next. So it's a pretty scary thing to permanently hand over control of your land to someone else. And so I get the question a lot, how am I protected? Well, as we said, it's voluntary. You negotiate all the restrictions. You don't have to agree to anything. You are basically laying out the future of your land, which can be challenging. It takes work and time. I find that very few people are able to imagine what they want in 100 years, much less 20 years. So it's often, I encourage people to take the time, discuss it with your family, really think about what future you want for the land and what you want for future owners of the land, for your grandchildren, for example, when we're talking about legacy. And so a couple of things to remember: you're often keeping much more than you're giving away. You're keeping the things you love and enjoy about the land, the right to continue agriculture, to continue recreation. You're giving away rights like building a gas station that you don't really want. And That's why it's possible for some people to do this. It's not for everyone. If the goal is to leave your heirs the maximum amount of money or control, this is not for you. Um, I'm thinking of an 80-year-old client that came to me and said, "Hey, you know, my kids never come back to this ranch. It's where they were raised. It's where I feel most connected to family. They never come back, and I can barely get their grandchildren to visit. But I want to change that." So she put a conservation easement on the land, very much overriding the wishes of her children, her 4 children, who wanted the money from selling the ranch. But what she found successfully is that her grandchildren started coming back. They appreciated the legacy. And now she has 2 of her 5 grandchildren living and cooperating together on running the ranch. They're building a lodge where all the family can meet. And it worked out as a legacy that brought the family back together. You don't have to share the land with the public. That is a myth that is out there you will encounter. There's no requirement to allow the public. That particular woman did. She wanted not just her family to enjoy the land, she wanted the public to see what was so sustaining to her spirit. And so the property was 2,500 acres with a river running through it. She set aside a pasture, 400 acres, not on the river, for the local school districts to build an educational center, environmental educational center. She didn't give them the land, she gave them the right to use her land. And so the public gets a taste of what's being conserved there, a very interesting part, but it's the part she wanted to share. And her family still owns it. Okay, next.
David, got
Yes.
another question real quick. This may be something you can answer quickly and maybe not. It could be a little more complicated, so I'll let you decide that. How might a conflict between a conservation easement and eminent domain be resolved?
Well, unfortunately, the answer is quick. We used to be able to protect some land from eminent domain with a conservation easement. Congress has taken that right away. And so, strictly speaking, a conservation easement cannot protect you from, or your land from, a determined eminent domain case. It can influence companies to go around you. We just worked on a pipeline through the Central Texas in the last couple of years, and they pretty consistently went around conservation easements, not because they had to, but they just saw the public relations value in doing it. But have no doubt that if it was too much trouble, they wouldn't do it. And then there's one other thing you should know. Hey, didn't I say this was going to be quick? I'm not living up to it. One other thing we can say is there is a small program through Texas Parks and Wildlife that is called the Texas Farm and Ranch Protection Program. And if you get any funding at all from that state program, which we often apply for their grants, then the standard for condemning land or taking private land is higher. The condemner has to show that there is no other feasible alternative. So sometimes it can take a year or more to get those grants, but it was worth it because even a small amount of money can give you some protection from an easement.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think this is the last slide. I just want to say, while your motivation, it should always be your commitment and vision for conservation of your land, There are rewards, and there are situations that we'll talk about where you can sell an easement and get cash. It doesn't exactly grow springing out of the ground like this picture, but it can be done. And even if there's no buyer for your easement, there are always extremely generous tax savings. Congress has made conservation easements the single biggest and most generous charitable donation. So we're going to talk more about that later, but let me open up and see if there's any questions with the basics before we start drilling down.
Anybody that's out there, if you want to have or actually speak your conversation, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, well, before I run out of time, I'm going to keep going, but please jump in anytime. So I've already said it's not for everybody, but here's kind of situations where we see people choosing easements. First and foremost, a very deep commitment to the land. And usually that involves generations of people who have lived on the land, worked the land, sometimes buried on the land, and that has deep emotional ties for people in a time when many of the last few generations are moving away, and this is a challenge for families who are rooted in the land. So obviously, keeping it in the family is often a motivation. Sometimes people don't know it when they acquire land, but they come to learn that their land has very high value for the community or the public, and they gain pride in their land and may choose to preserve it for the common good. A great example of that is both Austin and San Antonio have programs to try to preserve the drinking water and aquifers that are important to their cities. And when people find out their land is tied to Barton Springs or to the drinking water of Austin, there's a lot of pride in that, and they are interested, may develop an interest in conservation. I said tax deductions, moving to the third point, tax deductions are a way people are rewarded, but unfortunately, you have to have income in order to use a tax deduction. So sometimes we're struggling with someone who is earning a big tax deduction but can't use it. And we have to come up with strategies and timing in order to make that deduction worthwhile. But it can be with time and creativity, we can make those tax deductions pay off in many cases. And finally, some people just find themselves with a lot of value in land that they never really intended. And that would be property close to a city. And all of a sudden, land you paid $500 an acre for is worth $50,000 an acre. And you still want to keep your horses there. Easements allow people to take some of the money out of the land and keep the uses that they want. So go on to the, I found the clicker now. I did. Ah, all right. Oh no.
Whoops.
Folks, I am not safe with the mouse. All right.
You're doing good, David. Hey, one thing I did want to jump in here, just to give you a time check, it's 12:34, just letting you know.
Okay, great. I did skip this one slide. I just want to say that since easements are about perpetuity and the future, they almost always intersect with people who are planning their estate and their wills and the future of their family. So they often are two parts of the same process. Okay, so the topic now is, how do you get paid for an easement? These three pictures are some of the examples of when usually the money for buying an easement comes from the government because there's some government program. The biggest funder of conservation easements is the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And they have major programs to preserve farmland and ranch land. So it can take 2 years or more to get those grants, but for people who have the patience, it might be worth it. Other things, this bird on the left is a golden-cheeked warbler. City of Austin, City of San Antonio, Comal County, Travis County, Hayes County, Williamson County, between them, they've spent nearly $1 billion on preserving this bird. And a lot of that has been spent with private landowners to leave their land natural. So that's an example. The middle picture is a recharge feature of the aquifer. Old-time ranchers used to fill these up with wrecked cars and abandoned refrigerators, but these holes go directly to the aquifer and come out in springs and people's wells. And so the government will often pay to preserve these, and they're not all big and obvious like this, but if you're in the recharge zone of an aquifer, there may be a program to pay you. Another major program is wetlands on the coast and along rivers. So these are just some times when there'll be a buyer. And if you have a buyer, you can sell a conservation easement if you choose. The other possibility is giving away an easement to a nonprofit is a charitable gift. And when you donate it, there's an income tax deduction, but to the extent that the property's value is lowered, it's restricted, then there's also significant savings of estate taxes. And that's in the past has driven a lot of people to the final decision, because estate taxes in the past could be high enough to make people have to sell their land to pay the taxes. Right now, estate taxes are limited to very large estates. So that's not as much of an issue. A couple would have to have nearly $23 million, nearly $24 million of in their estate in order to owe estate taxes. But that's scheduled to change to a much lower number in 2025. So we may see estate taxes come back. So whether it's cash or taxes, easements are designed to give people incentives to grant easements. Okay.
So David, real quick before you move on, you mentioned something about reducing the appraised value. Does it reduce the value of the land? And does somebody interested in doing this, does it perhaps limit the buyer pool if they go to sell their property? Can you, I know we're pressed on time a bit. Can you talk to that briefly?
It's a very good question, and I thought I had a slide in here to cover that. Yes, it's the restrictions. Well, sorry, folks, I'm going faster than I want to. Okay. One slide right there. When you restrict the land, it does change the value, and it does change the pool of people who are interested in buying it. So if you go back to my example of that view, if you say no commercial buildings can be built on this land.
Mhm.
No Walmart, no gas stations. Well, obviously, you've removed those people from the pool of buyers. You also have, if you say no neighborhoods, no, no 1 acre lot subdivisions, you've removed developers from the buying pool. So, and you've probably reduced the value of the land. It's impossible to say in a broad way how much, because it depends on the restrictions you choose. It just depends on the demand for developing your land. If you're close to a city and you limit development, you may remove 85% of the value of the land because it's really valuable to be developed. But if your land is in West Texas, it might not change the value at all because nobody wants to build a Walmart on your property. So the range goes from about 20% reduction in value to 80 or more. They tend to be, easements tend to be valued between 40 and 60% of the value of the land. And I think we're probably, it's a little much to explain how that valuation is done unless we get it as a question. But that value determines your tax deduction or your cash payment. So let's say your property is worth $1 million, and we determine the restrictions you place on the land reduce the value by 400,000. That might be the amount of the tax deductions you're taking, 400,000. But we have to value it first, and each one is different. I see a question, Mark.
Yeah, I think that summarized it well. It goes back to your original point of most people that go into this are not going in because they want money out of it. They're preserving that land for a very specific purpose. So thank you, David.
Yeah, and what we do see with clients who have put easements on their land, it takes longer to sell, to find someone who understands and appreciates the easement, but they always do sell. The properties
Yes.
are sellable. There's just fewer buyers. It takes longer.
Gotcha.
Okay. I did it again. All right. I'm going, thank you. It says I have control, but there's actually very little control. All right. So I said that there's literally dozens, hundreds of things you can restrict. Here is a list of some of the biggest things. The most impactful thing is to say that land can't be made into smaller tracts. That is no subdivision. It's currently 100 acres. It will always be 100 acres. But you can do something of a hybrid. You can say it can be divided one more time, or it can be divided between my 3 children, but not any more than that. So how many subdivisions? How many additional buildings? We've got 1 house. I want to build 2 more for my grandchildren. Then we're done. No future buildings beyond those 3. You can replace those, but no, can't cover the landscape with buildings. No commercial activities except maybe a bed and breakfast or maybe a hunting lease. Though you can define which commercial activities. Some people never want to see their property plowed. Some people always want to see it plowed. Mineral development is one of the harder ones, but it is possible to allow oil and gas and mining, but it takes a lot of extra work to make that fit within a conservation easement. And so I won't go through every last one. You can see here all kinds of things come up in this negotiation. Here's Other things, some people don't want I don't know, don't want hunting, don't want fishing. They want a refuge for the animals. Some people want a scenic view. Some people don't want trash dumped. They don't want the forest cut down. So care of historical features. So there's many, many things that you can design voluntarily to protect your land and your vision.
Very good, David. I'm just going to interject a comment. This is not a question. I've been working with the landowner in sort of East Texas as a good example of that. One of her requests was she's going to sell the property eventually, and she wants to restrict hunting. So she has that ability, correct? As she develops a CE, she could actually restrict hunting for the future.
Yes, she can. I think I would advise her to be thoughtful about that, because sometimes an overpopulation
Sure.
of deer or certain animals can actually harm the land. It's it just needs to be an educated choice. But yes, and then they have to find a partner. You obviously wouldn't want to go to Ducks Unlimited and not allow hunting on your
Sure.
list. So,
Sure. Thank you.
okay, so if you do this, if you choose to go this path, the landowner, just summarize, can create a legacy, whether with their family or with the public, save on taxes, still have the use of the land's still appreciating in value, still marketable. You may get paid for some of the land that was locked up in the property that you had no intention of selling. A lot of people take those government programs to get a couple of $1 million and still keep using the land the way they wanted to use it. What the land trust or the government gets, they get to conserve things that are important to their mission: natural habitats, scenic views, historic sites. And it's much cheaper for them than buying the land outright and having all the maintenance costs. So they get to achieve their mission without taking on the full responsibility of owning the land. So Mark, let me see. I think I may be at the end of the slide stack. Let's see if there's any questions.
Okay. We did have one, and I was just kind of holding on to that. And again, I think this is multi-pronged, so you may have to try to summarize it. But this is from a landowner perspective, does it cost me anything to put my land in conservation? And then if so, how much and who pays it? The land trust? And again, I know that can be variable, so you may have to try to, I'm also thinking for this recording, that may be good for people that want to hear this later.
Yeah, it is a complex question. You know, over time, as we've learned how to make these easements work, how to enforce them, it has gotten pretty expensive to put a conservation easement on property. There's survey costs, and that's both real estate survey and natural feature surveys. There's issues to do with the minerals. There's appraisals. There's legal fees. So they add up a lot, but the single biggest cost is most of the land trusts, not the government, but most of the nonprofits ask you to make an endowment gift, a gift of cash along with the easement, so that they can hope to survive for hundreds of years and enforce your wishes. So all that's added up, and now people realizing how expensive that is for a landowner who is already giving away something. The land trusts have begun to cover as many of those costs as they can. And there are also a number of programs to pay the transaction costs. Um, those are good options, and there are more coming online, but they take time. So for a landowner who can pay their own costs out of pocket, it's much faster to just pay as you go and do the easement and achieve your goals. If you have time, if you can't do that or you have time, then we start by applying for grants, looking for money. Sometimes it's loans. Maybe the government's going to pay you 2 million, but it's going to take 50,000 to get the 2 million. You can get a loan and pay it back when you get paid. So that's a little bit of an overview. It definitely costs to give something away.
Sure. I'm going to pause right there. I've got a couple more, but I wanted just to take just a simple pause. Does anybody else have a question at this point? Okay, so this may be some of their questions. You mentioned monitoring, the need to monitor the easement. How is that done? Does somebody come to the property once a year, twice a year, whatever, and monitor, development or whatever?
Yes, the most standard monitoring regime that is allowed in a conservation easement is once a year. Staff from the land trust come out to the property. You can be there with them. You can schedule it with them, and they just drive or walk the property, and they look to see that all the restrictions are being obeyed. And and hopefully they catch misunderstandings and problems early, and those are sorted out. But it does happen that they catch intentional violations, and usually that's not. In fact, I've never seen an example where violations are made by the person who granted the easement. They're usually made by the next generation or somebody who bought the property with an easement on it. Anyway, if there's a violation, then starts with settlement talks, can end up in litigation. But one way or the other, the land trust job is to protect the land according to the terms of the easement.
Very, very good. The last one I wanted to bring up after I've been listening was if I were to put this on my property, uh, can I get out of a conservation easement or even make changes after it's established? Is there a process for that?
You know, I use terms like permanent and perpetual because it very much is, Mark, especially if you've gotten a tax deduction or been paid. It's very much permanent. There is a very, very narrow path to amendment, and it's really got to be because of change of conditions outside of the control of all the parties, and the amendments got to achieve more conservation than probably was originally granted. It's got to be a net gain. So it's very hard. Our firm has amended maybe a half dozen easements over the last 20 years. It can be done. It's time consuming and expensive. And as you might guess, we usually try to call the change a reinterpretation instead of an amendment, because amendments are frowned upon.
Great. That's perfect. Thank you. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? Well, hopefully we've got to most of your thoughts or concerns, but again, we'll pause and then I'll let David, if you want to jump back in and wrap it up.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for attending. I know there's a growing interest. I talk to people every week who want to learn more and find out how it can affect their family, and it only takes a call to set up a consultation with us. There's no charge unless you hire us, so that's an option for you. And there's another way to stay informed. Braun and Gresham has a twice a month newsletter that goes out and covers issues. Our landowner alert system, it goes out and covers issues like conservation easements for landowners in Texas. And you just need to subscribe by visiting our website. And yeah, if you don't like it, you can unsubscribe. But we get lots of compliments about the newsletter because the goal is to be helpful to landowners and show them their rights and options.
Perfect.
And here's contact information from Mark and me. We're both able to help you. Mark in particular works with landowners through all kinds of issues that come up around their ranch, property taxes and wildlife management and sale of the ranch. I'm a good choice, and Mark will send you to me if you have legal questions, whether it's conservation easements or something else.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Anything else? I think we're good. Let's see, we do have, well, somebody raised a hand. Let's see. That may have been unintentional.
Well, I see, will we be able to rewatch this presentation? So yes, I think it's going to be recorded and put on our website. Is that right, Mark?
That's correct. I was actually going to type the response to him, but that's correct. Yes, we're going to record these, and I believe a link will actually be sent to all the attendees, and of course it'll be kept so we can be, the link will be available for a lot of other people as well. All right. Anything else? Okay. Again, what I don't want to jump off before I say this one more time. That contact information is available to you guys. If don't hesitate, it could be something you think is really simple, but feel free to email us or call us. And if nothing else, at least we can address it and figure out if you need some help, or we can just answer a simple question. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm just going to say what David did. Thank you guys for attending and for hanging in there with us. It's a lot of information, but there's a lot to consider. So thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.